What is up, NFL fans, and welcome back to another episode of the NFL Whip Round. I'm Jeff Hartman, joined by Coach KT Smith as we talk about all the latest topics in the NFL. If you're watching this video on YouTube, like the video, subscribe to the channel. We do appreciate it. And make sure, for those that are listening in the audio form, if you found the FFS and NFL feed, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, so that you don't miss anything, not just our content, but all the NFL content that we put out there, all part of Fans First Sports Network. With that out of the way, Coach, how are you this week?
I'm doing great. We're into June, Jeff. That's a good sign.
It
And
is.
I know some mandatory mini camps are getting started now in the league, and hopefully there'll be a little bit more to talk about as we go.
And it's funny because last week we had an entire episode that was titled about who is going to be the next wide receiver to get paid. And we talked about, could it be CeeDee Lamb of the Cowboys? Could it be Justin Jefferson of the Vikings? And well, on Monday morning, late morning, we got our answer as the Minnesota Vikings and Justin Jefferson came to terms on a contract extension, a monster deal. It was the largest guaranteed contract for a non-quarterback in NFL history, a total of a 4-year deal, $140 million with $110 million guaranteed. I got to ask, what were your thoughts on this deal when you saw it? I sent you via text. I was like, I got to let Coach know that this news is breaking.
Yeah, it's a massive contract. It's obviously a sign of various things in the league right now. The emphasis on the passing game and the value that receivers now command in the game, the increased salary cap. Obviously, the league's pulling in a ton of revenue from a lot of different areas. But it's also a deal I think the Vikings could get done because they moved on from Kirk Cousins and because they've got cap flexibility. They now, with a rookie quarterback, presumably in J.J. McCarthy, if not at the start of this season, then I think probably by mid-season at the latest, you'll see him in the lineup. They're probably going to have 4 years where they don't have to pay the QB the insane dollars that the marquee quarterbacks get. So that freed up the money for them to be able to do the deal with Jefferson. My question to you, and I'll be interested in your response to this, is it's a massive deal. And I think your comment to me in the text was simply like, whoa. Are the Vikings kind of doing a disservice to some other teams by doing this massive deal with all that guaranteed money?
Some might say they're doing a disservice to the league. If you recall, this is not the first time the Vikings have been in this situation. Go back to when they signed Kirk Cousins. The deal was just over like $80 million, and it was fully like $80 million of it was guaranteed. Do you remember the reaction of the media landscape and fans when they found out that a quarterback was getting almost an entire contract fully guaranteed? They were astounded. Could you imagine any quarterback getting $80 million? That's it. And even just in guarantees, you'd be like, what a steal of a deal. Like that's where we are now. So here we are. Now they're doing $110 million guaranteed to Justin Jefferson. And my knee-jerk reaction was, this is setting the bar really high for the next guy. And this is the ripple effect that's going to come. And we're going to talk about that in a second as for who could be the next guy. But, Coach, I do think this is valuable. I want to read this off to you. Our Vikings, David Stefano of our Vikings First and School podcast, I had a phone call with him today, and we were talking about the deal, and he sent me this tweet from SpotRack. SpotRack does a great job of tracking contracts and salary cap information. Listen to some of these numbers, Coach. So Justin Jefferson's contract rankings, total value, $140 million first. Average salary of $35 million first. Total guaranteed, $110 million first. Guaranteed at signing, $88.7 million at signing, first place. The signing bonus of $36.9 million first. Year one cash of $38 million first. Second year cash, $69.9 million first. 3 years cash, $95.7 million. And they added, and oh, by the way, he's first by a mile in most of these categories. I want to get your thoughts. They didn't just pay him handsomely. They set an entire new stratosphere. Am I right? Am I reading this the correct way?
Yeah, absolutely. A few people had reacted by saying, well, hey, it's only $3 million more per year than what A.J. Brown is getting. So it's not that big a deal. When you just view it through the lens of a single season, that's correct. But when you view it in its entirety, like you just did, it really does speak to how outrageous the contract is. Now, Justin Jefferson has been phenomenal throughout his 4 years. From the moment he stepped on the field, he has not had a single season where he was not a top 5 receiver in the NFL. And the fact that he's averaging almost 100 receiving yards per game for his career, 4 games in, is amazing. But all of that said, to go so far above and beyond in terms of all of those categories is something the Vikings didn't need to do. Now, why did they do it? I don't know. I don't know what kind of leverage Jefferson's agent had. I don't know what they're specifically, like, what was their asking point? How much did the Vikings meet Jefferson versus Jefferson coming down off of what he was asking? David seemed to, he was thrilled. He was thrilled, but he didn't seem to think it was a bad deal. So that'll be the thing going forward. Obviously, they're locking up a great player for the next several years, but did they do it above the value at which they needed to do it?
I said to David when I spoke with him on the phone, I said, there's going to come a time when we're going to look back, just like on the Kirk Cousins deal, and say, wow, this wasn't that bad of a deal. It's just going to happen. And this is going to be my next question, which I think is a really difficult question. And I don't expect you to have a clear-cut answer. The fan narrative right now, in our culture, the way that it is right now, where everything is so expensive, some people are finding it difficult to manage their finances on a day-to-day, whether it's gas prices, whether it's the price of rent, food has gone up, all this stuff. You can imagine how they feel when a wide receiver gets paid, $110 million guaranteed with 89 of it due at signing. And I guess one of the things, we had a comment on our website, steelcurtainnetwork.com, when I wrote the article about this ripple effect. They said, when does it end? Like, when does this ever stop? Like, when do we hit the ceiling and say, okay, that was crazy? Like, I can't believe we did that. And then it kind of comes back down to the average. Is there a situation that you can envision in your head where this would ever stop? Or is this just going to keep going? There is no ceiling.
Well, when they put up the national debt clock in Times Square, they originally did it with enough digits for us to go $9.9999 trillion in debt. And then we went $10 trillion in debt. We had to take down the debt clock and put up a new one. So we didn't go, hey, the debt's so bad that we should do something about it. We just put up a new debt clock with more digits on it. And today the debt is $34 trillion. So that's a roundabout way of saying, no, there's no end to it. As long as there's money to be made, and for the foreseeable future, football is a cash cow.
Right.
Its popularity is growing around the world. The NFL is taking in greater and greater revenues every year, and then they're passing on those revenues to the players. And with an 18th game probably coming, that's even more revenue that's going to be directed the players' way. So this contract will, like all contracts, be relative to its time period. And 5-6 years from now, we'll look back on it most likely and we'll say, like, wow, Vikings got a steal in that Jefferson deal.
Yeah, you're right. And I will say this before we move on to our next topic. I will say this until I'm blue in the face. I've said it a million times. It was only a matter of time until the National Football League Players Association or the players themselves looked around the sports landscape and said, wait a second, Major League Baseball players are getting guaranteed contracts. Bobby Bonilla stopped playing when in like 1995 and still gets a check every June. NBA players are getting fully guaranteed contracts. What are we doing? It was only a matter of time until these football players realize that they do have leverage and they should ask for guarantees. Why? Because if not, they get hurt. They can just be cut and they get nothing. And the league has it set up so that these owners and these teams can just walk away. So I don't blame the players for going down this road. To me, it was only a matter of time. So when you're talking about the guaranteed money, and you can talk about the Vikings and screwing up stuff with guaranteed money, you can blame the Browns and the quarterbacks with the Deshaun Watson deal. You can blame, the Jacksonville Jaguars for the Christian Kirk contract that elevated all those numbers a few years ago. Let's keep it with the receivers, though. And let's go to our next topic, which is this deal with Justin Jefferson immediately now turns to the ripple effect. Who's the next player that's going to get paid based off of these numbers? A.J. Brown's contract kind of bumped it up. You saw like Jalen Waddle got paid. Amon-Ra St. Brown has been paid. Now, all of a sudden, there's a new bar set with Justin Jefferson. So there's two players that come to mind. CeeDee Lamb of the Cowboys, Jamar Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals are soon up for extensions. Let's go Bengals first. They locked up Joe Burrow on a deal through 2027 that pays him $55 million a year and soaks up 24% of Cincinnati's salary cap. A Chase extension in Jefferson's range would absorb another 15 to 20%. Can a team remain competitive when two players account for over 40% of their total salary cap? What are your thoughts on the Bengals and Jamar Chase?
Well, that's the dilemma that they're facing right now with
And I
this
love it, by the
Jefferson
way.
deal.
I love it. I love it.
little Schadenfreude for the Steeler fans, of course. That's their dilemma for sure, because I would imagine that I don't know if Chase is going to get Justin Jefferson money, but he's going to be in the neighborhood. And coupled with the Burrow contract, which runs through 2027, they're going to now, be in a situation where they're looking at quarterback, wide receiver, 40% of their overall cap. You look at the salaries that have grown the fastest over the last decade or so. It's quarterbacks, it's wide receivers, it's edge rushers, and it's corners. Those are the four position groups where you've seen the contracts just explode. And that's a distinct reflection on the influence of the passing game. So when you say, hey, we've got to be able to throw the football, and we got two of the best in the league at doing so in Burrow and Chase, then we're going to lock those guys up. We're going to make them the cornerstone of our team. And then we're going to have to nail everything else. That's really what they're going to have to do. They're going to have to make sure that they don't swing and miss on really anything. They got to get their draft picks right, because when you got these guys on the rookie contracts, you need to be able to maximize their value. You've got to be able to sign free agents that are not swings and misses. You can't overpay for anybody. It's doable. But the margin for error gets reduced so dramatically that you got to be right about everything else, and you got to pray to whatever God you pray to that neither one of those guys gets hurt.
Well, let's back it up a little bit. You said, I don't think Jamar Chase would get Justin Jefferson money or something along those lines. Well, why? Jamar Chase is an electrifying player, and he's been good since he walked into the NFL out of where? LSU. So these guys have a rapport with one another. I mean, they were teammates in college. If I'm Jamar Chase, I'm asking for that and then some. But what is it about Jamar Chase that makes you say that maybe he's not worth what that asking price could be?
Well, nobody's got Jefferson's numbers.
Right.
And so if you're just coming at it from a production standpoint, Jefferson has outperformed every receiver in the league over the last 4 years. So we'll see when that deal gets done. Now, Chase is not up for the extension immediately. He's got a year to go.
Yeah.
And CeeDee Lamb is the next in line. So I think where CeeDee Lamb lands will have a significant effect on what what Chase gets. So, yeah, if the Cowboys do something crazy with CeeDee Lamb, which I don't think they can do, then maybe you see Chase get Jefferson's money. But if you're talking about from just pure production, he shouldn't get the same deal.
I think that he has some leverage, though, because you would look at the Bengals as an organization. You've got T. Higgins, who's still there for only one more year, and that's if he signs his franchise tag tender and ever reports, which most would say that he'd rather get something rather than nothing this season, and so he'll eventually show up. But they're not looking to get a deal done with him. He can look at this, Jamar Chase, that is, and say, who are you going to have if you don't sign me back? You're going to lose T. Higgins. You don't want to lose me. You better give me what I want. And Joe Burrow, by the way, we're boys. Like, they are like best friends. They live near each other. And I wouldn't be shocked, though, if he signs a deal that is kind of like, okay, as long as Burrow's here, I'll be there. So it might not be the duration of a Justin Jefferson deal, but it might be more annual pay. They can manipulate those numbers. We'll see how that looks. But again, 40% of a salary cap to two players, there are some serious ramifications. You mentioned you better hit on all your draft picks. You better pray no one gets hurt. And if not, like you're screwed. Like, to me, does that not scream you're setting yourself up for failure?
Well, I mean, like I said, I think the window that you've now created for yourself to succeed is really narrow. The path through that window is very narrow. You have to do all of those things that we just talked about. When a guy leaves in free agency, you need to be able to replace that guy with a player who is of your system, because there's not much of an opportunity for you to go out and get a free agent who's really worth much to be able to plug in there. So you got to trust your development ability. You got to be able to say, we believe that we're going to be able to get guys in the draft over the next 3 years and develop them to become really good players in our system, because the alternative is free agency, and we don't have the money to be able to do that.
And what else would they do? Like, that's the thing. You have this situation like in Cincinnati. Well, what else would they do? They're going to have to pay him.
Yeah.
You're not going to let a Jamar Chase walk. Teams don't do that, not with that type of talent. But let's go to the other team that you mentioned, and that's the Dallas Cowboys and CeeDee Lamb. The deal the Cowboys gave Dak Prescott takes up 22% of their salary cap. But Prescott's contract is up after this year, and there's a lot of provisions in that prevent Dallas from designating him with a franchise tag or transition tags in 2025. Lamb is an unrestricted free agent after this season. The Cowboys are expected to have around $70 million in cap space to work with next offseason. But can Dallas get deals done for both Prescott and Lamb? That would be challenging, and that would probably come close to that 40% we just talked to at Cincinnati, would it not?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on how the salary cap works, but correct me if I'm wrong. If Prescott, whose current deal, he's going to count against their cap this year. No. He's going to actually count more against their cap than Burrow does because of the way his deal's structured. He's going to count $56 million against their cap this year.
That's crazy.
And then he can leave after this year and completely on his own, and they get nothing in return. CeeDee Lamb can leave after this year, and they get nothing in return. So you want to talk about leverage? Those guys have some really amazing leverage right now. And if you got 70 million in cap space to work with, and Prescott's getting 50 something right now, what does that leave for Lamb? I mean, is Prescott going to take less on the next deal? Now, maybe he'll find a way to structure it so it's team friendly, but how much less is he actually taking? Yeah. If he takes 40, then you're talking about 30 for Lamb. Well, Jefferson just got 35. A.J. Brown gets 32. Lamb's going to probably want more than 30. That's your 70 million right there. You got nothing else to work with. I mean, it feels like keeping both of those guys for Dallas is almost impossible.
To Dallas's credit, though, at least they have compiled the cap space to be able to at least offer both of them a deal. When you're talking about guaranteed money, that guaranteed money can come in a lot of different shapes and sizes, and people can manipulate numbers. For Steeler fans, Omar Khan has been a wizard at this since 2000 of how do you manipulate the numbers so that it's cap friendly. I think they could get a deal done. The problem would be is it's going to exhaust almost all your salary cap space. So then now you're looking at, okay, here comes March, new league year approaches. We just locked up Dak Prescott. We just locked up CeeDee Lamb, and we have no money for anyone else. And that's the scary thing, because then you're putting all of your assets, all of the money that you've saved and accrued over time, and you're just putting it into two players that have never gotten you there. At least Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase have been to the Super Bowl. These Dallas Cowboys have not done anything with Dak Prescott, a quarterback. So if I was a Cowboys fan, there would be some pause in regards to this. There would be some times where I would say, yeah, this is kind of a unique situation. There's already been some talk of Dak Prescott potentially going elsewhere and not wanting to return to Dallas. And then, like you said, what would that mean for CeeDee Lamb? Who's the quarterback going to be? Do I want to stay in Dallas? I think out of both, let's talk about it this way. Which situation is stickier and more difficult to manipulate, Cincinnati or Dallas?
I think it's Dallas because, I mean, they really haven't done a good job clearing the cap space, because the only reason they have 70 million is because Prescott and Lamb come off the books next year. Right. If you want to put them back on the books, they've got no cap space at all. Yeah. They gave a big extension to Trayvon Diggs, the corner. They're going to have Micah Parsons up and not that far down the road. They've really put themselves in a position where they better win this year. This is it. This is the window, because it gets really tricky a year from now. They're either going to lose one of or both Prescott and Diggs or Prescott and Lamb, or if they re-sign both, they'll have no money left for anybody else, and a Parsons extension looming. And if there's a guy you want to keep in Dallas, it's Parsons.
Yeah.
So I think that they've got a real. I mean, Cincinnati can do it. They're going to be in a position where they're going to be able to do it, but they'll be limited. Dallas, if they do it, I mean, their back is really against the wall.
It's going to be interesting. I've obviously believed that the salary cap is a pseudo myth and that they can manipulate numbers in any which way that they want. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. And if they manipulate around it, then it's just going to solidify my thoughts on the salary cap. But let's leave the contract talk for till next week. I'm sure there might be another signing between now and then. Let's talk about the kickoff rules. These new kickoff rules, which if you watch the XFL or some of the spring leagues, they've been like the model. They've been the model for this. Now, there's intrigue around the league. The Kansas City Chiefs most notably have entertained safety Justin Reed, who actually has kicking experience, using him instead of Harrison Butker for kickoffs. And no, it has nothing to do with Harrison Butker's comments off the field, I don't think. When this kickoff model was used in the XFL, kickers made the tackle on about 30% of plays. That seems really high. The Chiefs don't want this for Harrison Butker and may use Reed instead. Could something like this possibly become a trend throughout the league? I have been asking a lot of beat writers that I speak with and have on my podcast about the Steelers, what the Steelers are doing in OTAs to practice this. And they said right now, they haven't had a lot of live kicking situation. It's just been more lane responsibilities. How are we going to handle running down the field? And when they catch the ball, I don't know. Like, this is really interesting, but you would have to imagine though, Harrison Butker should be talented enough to be able to place the ball and kick it in a way that would also make him more valuable than using a Justin Reed just for his tackling ability. The same could be said for Justin Tucker in Baltimore or Chris Boswell in Pittsburgh, some of the elite kickers in the NFL. What's your take on this, Coach? What do you think?
I'm so intrigued by the new kickoff rule simply because of the way that coaches will be forced to scheme it. And it brings more strategy into the game. And I'm always a big fan of adding strategy. And as I understand it, none of the guys, hang time's not going to be an issue anymore because none of the guys on the kickoff team can move until the ball is
Right.
caught. So it doesn't matter how long he hangs it up there or, I think where he puts it on the field can matter because you can direct your coverage to a certain area. But it's still a scenario whereby if you've got everybody positioned at the same level and you need to be really, really good not to get them all to run down in one wave. One of the big challenges on your kickoff team is to stagger your lines so that if they bust through the first group of guys, then here comes a second group of guys who's converging on the ball carrier. But when you move everybody up the field that far and you don't give them a running start at all, the separation is going to be less. And I think while it may be a little bit harder to bust through a seam, if you bust through a seam, there's a lot of times there's going to be nobody there but the kicker. And I think that's what they're worried with. And that's what they saw in the XFL a lot was that now in the XFL, they let the kicker run down the field. Whereas in the NFL, they're not letting them go past the 50 from what I understand. But then, which is why so many XFL kickers made a lot of tackles. And obviously the teams are like, hey, our kicker's valuable. We don't want to get hurt making that tackle. So you're going to have to really, really spend a lot of time making sure that the lanes are perfect on these teams to eliminate the long returns. I think we're going to see some big returns. And I missed that the last couple of years in football.
All right, so let's put your special teams coordinator cap on now, and let's talk about if you're coaching this up. You said hang time means nothing anymore, and I agree because you cannot move until the ball is touched by the return man. So placement is going to be paramount. Would you squib it? Like, would you kick it on the ground?
You can't. It's not allowed to hit the ground before in the landing zone, which is like the 25 to the end zone, something like that.
So how would you coach this up? Like, what would you tell your kickers to do?
Directional kick it. You try to pin them in between. The hash in the NFL is a lot more close to the field, so you have to find another landmark. In high school, you'd say we're gonna try to pin them between the hash and the boundary, and then you scheme your coverage based upon that. You've got aiming points. You got 10 guys lined up across, and you're going to number all these guys 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from the left and the right. And you're going to say, all right, the 1s and the 3s and the 5s. All right, your aiming point is face mask. You're going right to the ball. The 2s and the 4s, your aiming point is near shoulder. You're falling back 5 yards and you're trailing that first group by 5 yards so that you're squeezing it behind the play in case they break through the first guy. You really need to coach the heck out of your run fit, so to speak. It's basically like a run fit on an extended field. So yeah, I think you have to kick the ball to a direction to reduce the amount of field that there is to cover, and you got to make sure that those guys are great in their fits.
Now the next question is, do you change up who you might have on your kickoff team? So what's the tip? Like, give me positionally. Are you going to want? Let's talk Steelers since we know that roster. You would love to have an athlete like Minkah Fitzpatrick out there, but you're not going to put Minkah Fitzpatrick out there because, well, he's Minkah Fitzpatrick. So what kind of athlete are you going to want in your kickoff teams? Are you going to want to mix it up and have some big guys out there too to break up the line and try and allow people to penetrate through? Like, how would you handle that?
I don't think so, because I think even more than ever now, speed is paramount.
Okay.
You got to get there right now because of the fact that you don't get the running start. And so I think safeties, linebackers, I think wide receivers who can cover and tackle will gain value. You see sometimes that there'll be a guy who adds an element as a wide receiver on special teams. And I think that guy is going to be in a little bit higher demand. You might see a linebacker who maybe he's not the greatest rundown backer, but he moves really, really well. He's good in pass coverage. And you might say, hey, he's our 53rd guy because he adds us a lot of value in special teams. So it doesn't, we're not talking about revolutionizing the game, but it does change the calculus when you're evaluating personnel a little bit.
It's going to be fun. I'm actually excited for it. I'm actually excited to see that part of the game, like you said, come back. It's been gone for so long. And I hope that it's done safely so that the team doesn't, or the league doesn't just go back and say, okay, we had too many head injuries or players got hurt. Let's hope this works out. But any final thoughts on that before we move on?
No, I like the penalties too. If you kick it too long, you kick it into the end zone, the ball comes out to the 30. If it lands short of the landing zone, it comes out to the 40. And you're basically saying to the kickers that you've got to be really, really accurate. It's almost like a golf analogy, man, where you got to be able to chip the ball into a really certain spot because of the nature of the green or something along those lines.
If it's the 30, if they kick it into the end zone and it comes to the 30, they might have to change that. Because I feel like if there's a team that has Tyreek Hill, the Miami Dolphins, if Tyreek Hill's back there and he's returned 4 kicks already for a touchdowns, I'll take it. Hey, start at the 30, drive on our defense,
Well, that's what the Chiefs special teams coordinator said. He said, hey, there will probably be times where we still use Butker. Like there's a minute left in the game and we don't want to risk a long return. So we just have him bang it through the end zone.
So if they change that end zone to the 40, like as if you kicked it out of bounds, that changes everything because now you only need about 20 yards to get in field goal range. So that's when it will become really interesting. So we'll see how that changes. Okay. The fifth and final topic here, the NFLPA is supposedly working on a proposal that would eliminate OTAs. Well, not eliminate, but move them next offseason to belly up with reports to training camp or reporting times of training camp. So they have a much longer ramp up period, as they're calling it. What's your thoughts on this? And do you think the owners will go for it?
Yeah, this is interesting. They're really kind of talking about moving the start of training camp into the end of June, early July. So it's a longer training camp period, but it's a longer, more cohesive off season. So a lot of the players supposedly don't like that the off season gets chopped up so much by having to return to the facilities in May, and that if you give them from, let's say your team ends its season in early January, and now they don't have to report until late June, you're giving them almost 6 months where they're training on their own, letting their bodies recover, spending time with their families, and these types of things. And so there are some players who seem to be in favor of that. There are others who are like, why would we want a longer training camp? Why would we want 6 continual months of football? Some of these players don't seem to mind the fact that you go to OTAs for a little bit. Heck, you could skip them if you want. They are voluntary. And you go back home to your family for a while, as opposed to, hey, it's late June and I'll see you in January. And so that'll be very interesting to see if it actually comes to fruition. I would be willing to bet that the NFLPA is split on that as much as the owners are. I don't know. Training camp sucked. And I'm just telling you from college experience, it was a miserable time where you're eating, sleeping, and breathing football, which on one hand is great because you love the game, but on another hand, everything hurts. Everything's uncomfortable. Why would you want more of that? I don't know why they would. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, as a coach, which would you prefer? Would you prefer to have that normal setup? You see them, they leave for a month or so, and then they come back? Or would you rather have a longer gap after the draft, and then all of a sudden they're going to be there and they're going to stay there all the way through camp? Where would you sit on as a coach?
I would prefer the current system. I want to be able to check in with the guys and be able to give them things incrementally, and especially the young guys. I'd want to get those young guys right out of the draft. I just drafted you. Let's get you into the classroom and onto the field where I can just work with you and the rookies, and then assimilate the veterans slowly. And the install process is a lengthy one, and a lot of times what you do is you install a few concepts, you looked at them, you said to yourself, hey, I really liked how we did this, and this, but I'm not so sure we can do this. So let's take that out. When we get back into OTAs, we'll revise that with the players, etc. But once you get there permanently, it feels like it just goes really fast. And like you don't have that time to revise on the fly because you map out everything that you do. So now you're like, oh, well, I want to take something out, but that's going to mess with everything else that we've mapped out. I think it would just feel like really rushed and condensed.
Yeah, it's interesting. And when you asked the question, or when we brought it up, would the owners go for it? I think the only way the owners would say, okay, we're on board, is if there was some type of contingent plan to an 18th game. If that was like, okay, well, we'll do this, that's fine. We're eventually going to be tacking on another week, and we're going to have the Super Bowl now on President's Day weekend, which I actually think would be a great idea. But still, you have that stipulation. Do you think the owners would go for it at all?
I think you're right. They're not doing anything out of the goodness of their hearts. That's for damn sure. Hey man, I get it. You want to spend more time with your family? You got it, buddy. You got it. That's not the owner's approach.
We will see, because again, this is just a proposal, and the NFLPA was reportedly just kind of putting their feelers out with the players, and the players, like you said, might say, "No, we do not like this idea." In which case, this could all be a bunch of do about nothing. So let's finish this up with a player profile. Really interesting story. Gable Stevenson is one you want to talk about. This is a really, really fun story. I'll let you go ahead and talk about it, Coach.
Yeah, so some listeners may have read this about the two-time wrestling champion out of the University of Minnesota being signed by the Buffalo Bills. He's got no football experience whatsoever, but he's about 6'1" and 275 or so pounds. He's expressed an interest in playing football. He recently signed with the WWE, but chose not to go that route. Obviously, he's a tremendous wrestler. He's had one of the most successful wrestling careers of anybody in NCAA history. And Buffalo's taking a flyer on converting a guy who has tremendous quickness, strength, speed, uses his hands exceptionally well. They've got a position group need in the interior of their defensive line, and they're going to give this dude a shot. I thought it was hysterical that at their OTAs, when he reported last week, it was the first time he'd ever put on cleats in his entire life. But it's a fascinating subject, and it's not one, you and I as Steeler fans, we know Pittsburgh went down that road years ago with Carlton Hasselrig, and so it'll be very interesting to see how this works out.
Sometimes these players, I think a lot of times people look at some of this stuff as a publicity stunt, but sometimes it can work out. And this is not to the same extent. You've seen a lot of rugby players come over to the NFL, and that's an easier transition than probably wrestling. You brought up Carlton Hasselrig for sure. Do your homework if you don't know who that is. But I think too, I think about Alejandro Villanueva, right? Tight end at Army, goes and serves. He was actually in Philadelphia. They tried to transition him to a defensive tackle, and everyone that talked about that situation said the same thing. And that is, you know what? This was all publicity stunt. He's a former Army vet. We're going to bring him into camp, And it was the Steelers that saw him and said, let's see if we can turn this guy into an offensive lineman. Sometimes it works out, as Alejandro Villanueva was a very good player, a Pro Bowl tackle for the Steelers for a long time. I don't know if this is going to work out, though. That this is such a change. Do you think in today's NFL, a guy even as athletic as this kid can come in and never wear cleats before and all of a sudden go out and make plays enough to make a team?
It's an exceptional long shot.
Yeah.
Simply because, well, on one hand, for all the reasons you just said, but on the other hand, he's not that big. He's
Right.
6'1" and 275, which that's a large human being by normal standards, but the NFL is not normal standards. And when you're going up against 330-pound offensive guards and you're giving away 60 pounds, that's a problem. And you've never handled that before. You've never split a double team. Granted, I think wrestling translates wonderfully to football, especially on the lines. And I love when our football players wrestle because they are just so much more aggressive and they're so good with that hand play in the interior. This is a very different animal. And again, if he were like 6'3" and 300 pounds, I'd think to myself, all right, well, physically, he's going to be okay in there. But when you're giving away 60 pounds in a one-on-one block, or you're having to split a double team and it's 680 pounds a human being and you've never done that before, that's going to be a challenge.
It is going to be a challenge, and we'll have to see if he makes the team and what happens. He might end up back in the WWE, which, hey, that's fine. Look at Kurt Angle; he made a career out of that as well after being a championship wrestler. But all right, Coach, it's been a great show. What do you have coming up in the call sheet? Which I have to say, I had to play a segment of your last episode for my wife and kids. We were getting breakfast ready, and it was the story of you slugging a kid in the face with your Evel Knievel metal lunchbox and got suspended for it. And I was like, this is the guy that we have as like our NFL expert. So they got a kick out of it. They laughed. They thought it was hysterical, but it was a great episode last week. You can go back and check it out. Episode 58 talked about Jack Lambert. What do you have coming up this week?
Well, I'm actually, when we get done here, I'm going to reach out to Dave Stefano and see if he wants to come on for a little bit and talk about that Justin Jefferson contract. And he's been on the call sheet before. He does a great job. He's interesting to listen to, and just hear his thoughts on that and really his thoughts on the NFC. I almost call it the NFC Central, the NFC North, with just that division has really transformed. It's become one of the more interesting divisions in the NFL. So gonna try to get Dave on and weigh in on some of those topics.
59. You sticking with the Steelers linebacker theme there?
No, I'm gonna move on. I can't. I have to mention Jack Ham, but I want to try to be objective and good to all of our listeners.
The hammer. All right. Good stuff as always, Coach. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. We'll be back next week for another NFL Whip Round. Take it easy, everyone.